Hey everybody, welcome back to The Reason We Learn. I'm Deb Philman, mom, homeschooler, ex-teacher, and individualist. I want to talk a little bit about property rights. It's not something you think you'd find on my channel. I usually talk about education, but bear with me here because I think the reason we've gotten to this point is that our kids, all the way up now through probably age 40 or so, have not been properly educated in their rights, what they are and what they aren't, and took a bunch of things for granted and didn't learn history and so forth. So I think we've come to a place where we have a very superficial understanding of our rights. We don't understand how they intersect and how the infringements on them now can be even more insidious than we might have thought. They don't need to be direct. We don't necessarily need to have a law passed specifically for our rights to be infringed and so on. And I would suggest to you that a lot of what we've seen in terms of the rise of the woke, especially the boldness in our school systems and in our colleges and universities, the way that they've just, we know it's been death by a thousand cuts over the past, well, gosh, at least 40, 50 years, but really, ramped up in the last decade. But I think most people, myself included, would say it has exploded in the last year. That since the whole George Floyd thing, and that's what people go back to as the marker in time, it's just been coming out of the woodwork. They're saying the quiet parts out loud, all the phrases people use. And I would like to suggest that the reason that has happened, the reason they've gotten so bold, the reason they're able to get away with it, the reason the news media, the politicians, etc., are not questioning it and in fact promoting it, and with so much confidence, without any fear whatsoever of backlash from the American people, is that our property rights were taken first. So there are organizations out there right now pushing for freedom of speech, we're organizing, we're getting lawyers, we're going to fight for your freedom of speech. And that's great. Except our freedom of speech has not been infringed legally. Our kids, yes, in schools, if they're compelled to say things like Gabrielle's son, yes, that's a violation of his freedom of speech. Absolutely. And it's crystal clear, but that's not how it's working for most people in so-called cancel culture. And most people are going to have a tough time with lawsuits. They might be able to have a lawsuit for creating hostile workplace. They might be able to get some kind of a defamation thing going on. They might be able, if they have a contract dispute, okay. But the vast majority of us, especially working in an at-will state, which, most liberty-loving people think is fine. Yeah, I have no problem with at-will employment. But how willing are you going to be to speak up against what your kid's school is doing when it's been made very clear to you very fast that doing so equals being white supremacist, even when you're not white? And that information about your alleged white supremacy, because you oppose the diversity, equity, inclusion training that's going on in your school or possibly even your workplace, when that gets back to your boss, that you're a white supremacist, alleged, of course, or racist, or, people feel uncomfortable around you now because you spoke out against something so important, how likely are you to raise your voice and protest? And what if you believe, incorrectly in my opinion, but let's say, that you must continue to use these schools, that you have no choice? What if your kid doesn't want to leave? They're a high school junior or senior, and they're like, Mom, I got to graduate from the school, and all my friends are here, and even if it's online, I got to finish here because I started here and whatever. I don't want to leave. Now they're of an age where good luck to you pulling them out, and yet they're still going to be subjected to this nonsense. How easy is it going to be for you to speak up? I know it's not easy. I'm sitting here telling you, speak up. And I mean it. And I think you have to. I think it's an existential threat. I just want you to understand that I understand that it's not so simple, even though there hasn't been a single law passed infringing on your speech. Not a one. But you know what you did lose this past year, quite explicitly, without necessarily legislation, but certainly orders, executive orders, and other kinds of orders from your governors and your mayors and so forth. You lost your property rights. You lost your right to go to work and make a living. If you couldn't work from home, you were SOL for quite a while, weren't you? that caused a loss of income. That caused you perhaps to even be dependent on those government stimulus checks. Or worse, you had to actually sign up for government benefits. Maybe you lost your insurance outright because you lost your job or your industry completely closed up and folded and everything went to hell. And now you've got to go on the government, subsidized healthcare too. And now you're hearing language like anybody who criticizes the government is a potential domestic terrorist, or it's hate speech to speak out against this president, or it's racist if you don't agree with this policy if your mayor happens to be black or whatever. Or just disagreeing with anything government does is racism now. Do they have to pass a law infringing on your speech? Of course not. They just have to make you good and scared that you're going to lose your property. Either directly because they're going to go and slap an order on the door saying you may not open this building, you're going to jail, or indirectly by just, running your business out of business because they've made things very difficult for that industry and they're trying to, consolidate things for the good buddies over at Amazon or Walmart or whatever. And, supply chains are kind of tightened up. Or, hey, let's raise the price, the tax on gas. Let's raise, we're going to start taxing mileage. We're going to raise taxes by 30% next year. Who's going to be hurt the most? If your income's lower than $400,000, it's not going to affect you. No, of course not. Except that the people whose incomes are higher, also people like your boss or, the people who run these companies or whatever, who are going to downsize and automate and do other things. And now you've lost property again. You've certainly lost security. Yeah. So you traded your long-term security for the short term. And I say you, I mean, we as a people, because they took it from us. We've traded long-term security for the short-term security if I might not get a virus. I might not get a virus. That's much worse, getting that virus, than, not being able to ever retire, possibly having to sell my home, move into a much smaller home, or not have a home at all, have to rent. Or maybe you're a landlord and you're now moving into year 2 of not being able to collect rent per the CDC of all people. They've had their property rights violated. Now imagine you're a landlord and a parent. Okay? So your speech is curtailed when you're completely dependent on the people who just took your property rights. You're not as likely to speak out against them and their agents in the schools. Right? You don't want to put crosshairs on your kid any more than you want one on yourself. And that's what we're dealing with right now. That's what we're dealing with. In Nazi Germany, they lost their property rights way before they lost their speech rights. Most people don't know that. Most people just assume Hitler came into power and, curtailed freedom of speech. Nope, he didn't. He changed private property, private ownership of corporations. He made very strict regulations on how the factories operated, what they had to make and when, and whom they had to hire and fire and so forth. That all happened long before he closed down newspapers. Long before. And I'm not saying that they weren't sort of bullied into writing things about him that were favorable. They were, but it kind of didn't matter. They didn't really have to do much bullying when he just had the power of a pen to say, this kind of business now has to manufacture things for war. I can't manufacture consumer goods. Or these people, if you want to keep ownership of your business, you're going to do what I say. You're going to fire all the people I tell you to fire. That's not about speech. It's about property rights. It's about right to contract. That's about other things than, that's about losing due process, the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment has been violated and violated and violated and violated and is still being violated every day of every week, of every month, going into year 2. In many, many states, not all, thankfully, but most states of this country, to some degree, the 14th Amendment is still being violated. And you have organizations springing up saying, we're going to be the new ACLU. We're going to protect your freedom of speech. Knock yourself out. You'll have some high-profile lawsuits of some people who can literally allege that their freedom of speech and association has been violated. And, you'll spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe more, helping them get a settlement for that. But what have you really done to advance the cause of liberty? What have you done to preserve Western civilization? If you don't go after the people taking away your property rights legally, and don't start suing some of these people for doing it and get that up to the Supreme Court and make sure that governors know that they can't just draft an emergency. If once you can take away property rights because there's an emergency, you can manufacture emergencies. Who gets to define the word emergency? That needs to be so crystal clear and limited, and it isn't. It isn't, and it hasn't been. And now you have the federal government trying to come in and say, governors, you need to shut back down again. That would be a gross violation of property rights, not freedom of speech. Y'all can stand on the street corners and scream and yell as much as you want. You can go out and protest as much as you want about how much it sucks, how your kids can't go to school, blah, blah, blah. But you know what? Even the school thing is a property rights issue. So I mentioned it in my last video. They have taken your money from you by force. You don't have a choice but to pay those property taxes. If you're a renter, you're paying it in your rent. You don't have a choice. That is required, or you will go to jail and pay hefty fines, and guess what? Lose your property that it's attached to. So you have no choice but to part with that money. It's not your money. It becomes theirs the instant you earned it or the instant you bought that house. Okay? It becomes theirs. That property doesn't even belong to you. It belongs to the bank. So even if you own it outright, it belongs to the government because they can take it away from you if you don't pay the property taxes. So what do your property taxes go for? Well, if your city is anything like mine, the vast majority of it goes for schools. The highest percentage, go check it out. You can find out. It's available publicly on the internet. So check it out for your city. The vast majority of it goes to schools. Now they close the schools and they claim they're giving you this service. You can sit home and it's hybrid and thing and so forth, whatever. But no, you literally paid for those buildings. You pay for their upkeep. You pay the salaries of those teachers. You pay for access to whatever materials they've bought. You pay for that. If you have a special needs child, you've paid for those services, which you cannot possibly access from home. Not to the degree that you paid for them and were led to believe you could expect them. So this is a property rights issue. So what's my point? You're sitting there, okay, Deb, okay, what's your point? Hurry up, get to the point. Here it is. Tell these organizations, if you want to, or just go do it yourself, that as much as you love that they're fighting for you to be able to say what you want and believe what you want, whatever, nobody is literally legally trying to prevent you from doing that. They're putting pressure on you by depriving you of property rights. So your move needs to be to leave the schools because your greatest power is in your absence. When the vast majority of people have left these buildings for good and are not using them anymore, even if you're still paying, the pressure is going to be a lot more pronounced because you're going to have empty classrooms, teachers with classes for very few students, etc. And yet they're going to be collecting a ton of money. The disparity is going to be so obvious. The point will be so clearly made that this is a product no one wants to buy, that it's going to be a lot more difficult for the politicians to hold you hostage, because you literally won't be a hostage. You'll be able to say, I'm going to elect whoever is running who's going to give me my money back. That's literally my only issue. Give me my damn money back and you can have the job. That's it. Or if you really still believe in public schooling, whoever's going to come in and completely redo this crap and build me a product I want to buy can have my vote. Personally, I don't like that idea because I don't think government can or should be doing it. But first, you got to physically leave. They've got your property no matter what. So your only freedom left is your freedom of movement. Move. That is your speech. That is your freedom of association. Get out of there. Stop being dependent on them. And suddenly the words you're free to speak will carry a lot more weight. And you're much more likely to get that money back. You can sit there now and go like, reopen the schools, or, freedom of choice. Give me a voucher. And can I just ask, and this goes to the school choice people too. It's your property. School choice in the form of a voucher is like Medicare for schooling. Do you look forward to Medicare? Do you look forward to it? Or are you hoping you have enough money to buy Medicare supplemental insurance because your parents or grandparents have told you how crappy it is and how they wouldn't be getting by if they weren't able to close the donut hole with private insurance, or get private insurance just to get the kind of things they want in any kind of a timely manner, because Medicare won't do it without waiting months, or simply won't do it at all because they're over an age limit or whatever, or the doctors are limited and that's a violation of doctors' property rights. But I digress. The point is, Why do you want to run the money through a middleman for a voucher? They currently spend in some districts about $20,000 per kid. Imagine that money in your hands. What could you do with it for education? I'm not saying you shouldn't have to say on a piece of paper, I'm getting my kid an education, or here's their standardized test scores. I had them tested this year, and here's what's going on. Maybe you take that money and stick it in a college savings account. Maybe you put it in just aside for their just future life. Maybe you just make sure they get proper medical care because you can't really learn if you're sick. Whatever. It's your money. You should be able to do with it. You should decide what an education is, and you should decide what's good enough and not good enough and so forth. And if they just want to make sure you're not abusing your child and making sure they get an education, then okay, have you sign on a dotted line or do something or whatever to show that your kid took a test and look, they can read. Okay? But it's your money. It's yours. And you're, running it through a middleman to get a voucher so you go to Catholic school and get a tiny portion of what they just spent to pay the educational equivalent of the IRS or the Medicare, people who don't pay dollar for dollar at all to these doctors. Why would you do that? Why would you allow them to create another bureaucracy with a voucher? And on top of that, the way Medicare works is they get to go back to the doctors and tell them what medicine is. They get to tell them what healthcare is. Hey, my patient needs a hip replacement. Yeah, but this kind's really expensive. So you need to get the cheaper kind. That's what we'll pay for. Guess what? The same will be done with your education. Here's your voucher, but we now decide that the schools that you're allowed to spend it on meet our government regulation restrictions on what they teach for curriculum. They have to have a diversity, equity, and inclusion program. So how good's your stupid voucher? The only way you're going to have your freedom of goddamn speech is if you have your property rights back. So I'm speaking to you, nonprofits, as well as parents. You who think you're going to replace the ACLU that is gone forever. I mean, bye-bye. Nice knowing you. You think you're going to defend the freedom, by just going at the 1A. I'm going to go to the 1A. But when I ask you, will you defend my property rights? You're like, no. Or you flat out tell me no because I'm still a progressive. I'm still a socialist. I still believe in progressive taxation. I still don't think the lockdowns were that bad. I don't support you because you're full of crap. You're not going to help anybody. You will help 1 or 2 or 3 people here or there with a lawsuit settlement. Yay. Slow clap. You're not saving anybody. You're not saving the republic. You're not going to restore liberty. Liberty isn't just contained in the First Amendment, okay? In fact, the First Amendment isn't worth diddly without the 14th and the 2nd. So if you're not going to defend those two, I don't know. Sorry, you're not getting my support. I don't oppose you. I mean, you're whatever, knock yourself out. But those of you who are thinking of joining these groups or giving donations to these groups or putting a lot of energy and time promoting these groups or lending your name to these groups, I mean, whatever floats your boat. It's a free country for another 5 minutes. I'm just trying to tell you what reality is. And if you're a parent and you're talking about, school choice and and I would just make sure I can have my speech rights, whatever. You have those. What good are they doing you? As long as you can still have your money taken away from you, and government still defines what an education is, and government still says what that money has to be spent on, and government can still, structure things in such a way with teachers unions and everything else that if God forbid you use that freedom of speech against them, you're going to lose your job or your house and be dependent on government some more. Whatever. Just whatever, So that's why I brought up property rights. If you find this content useful, please like, subscribe, share, and comment. Have a great day.